Jake, do you want to give a quick introduction of yourself and then I can go?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Jake Gretzinger. I'm a senior within the digital practice here in New York City. Been with the firm about 4 years and work in digital strategy and product. So anywhere from kind of entering markets with a new digital product to actually the build of that. It's kind of what I've been working through for the last 4 years. Was in Watson when I was at Binghamton and was president of MCG back, I think, like 5 years now-ish. So been with the club from the beginning. It's been awesome to see it grow to what it is today, where we have as many people on a competitions committee as we did in e-board back when I was in school. So it's fantastic. Hats off to the team, but really excited to run through this workshop today. We did a similar thing last year, and I think we got a lot of solid feedback. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. And so for myself, Adam Pitkin, been at EY for also 4 years and change, senior consultant. I've spent most of my time here within our FSO technology risk consulting group, but recently earlier this year, transitioned over to a new role in our America's Innovation Business Unit, and a function that incubates new products and solutions for our service offerings. I also, like Jake, was part of the executive board way back when this competition was founded. I think, Jake, maybe it was even actually 6 years ago at this point, because I think we ran 2 years of it while we were at Bing. So it must be 6 years now, maybe 5 calendar years, but 6 iterations. And at the time it was called Strategic Insights. And what Jake and I and the rest of the e-board really wanted to do was introduce a case competition at Binghamton University that had a slightly more technology focused subject matter or challenge, or in some way, shape, or form open the doors for the competition to be accessible by both Watson and SOM students and Harper students for that matter, because we saw a void in the case competitions available to students, or really even professional development experiences on campus, where many were either heavily focused on specific subject matter for a specific major, like let's say the finance case competition, or were more broad, let's say like an innovation challenge or a hackathon, where maybe it was focused on one particular school, but not one particular discipline. This competition was meant to be applicable to really anybody, where someone with a technology background or maybe one of the STEM majors can, offer value to a team, but also someone from SOM or Harper or someone with even just really strong soft skills can find a role in a team that presents a successful solution. And really, that's how we see our industry and the consulting world operate today. So really happy to see this competition has now matured far greater than we could have anticipated. And the partnership remains strong between EY and MCG, and we love to see that the excitement's still there on campus for this every year. So one of the things we did a few years back was look for a way where we could spin the competition to move a little bit away from a traditional case study approach and take it a little bit closer to what we actually do in more of the world of technology consulting, or in the digital or product space. And one of the ways we thought we could do that is by asking teams to focus more heavily on the user and developing their recommendations, and less on just what's the most financially sound recommendation, or what are the exhibits in the case study point to as the right solution. Really ask you to put the hat of the user or the customer or the person who actually interacts with the company or product, step into their shoes and imagine what they need, and then make the recommendations for the company based on that. And the concept that really, or the I guess, group of concepts that dictates taking that approach is called design thinking. And so that's what we're really here to talk about today. But first, Jake is going to walk us through some metrics and insights to explain how the shift in what we've seen in the market over the last several years, and really a trend that's been going on since the couple of technology booms that happened generations before us, how this shift has kind of caused the need for us to take an approach like this in solving a lot of business and technology problems today. So, Jake, let me pass to you to pick up the baton.
Yeah, I think the way we think about this is like we no longer need to take the traditional consulting framework when we talk about problems. Like, so we don't need to always worry about, you know, cutting costs by X% or whatever it may be. Like, there's a lot of traditional frameworks out there that we tend to apply and teach. And I think what we want to show here is that some of the impacts that we're going to show in the next couple of slides are just as valuable as some of those larger frameworks that you're presented in like a, case in point book or whatever it may be. So just to kind of reiterate, also one thing we're seeing is that like not customers, but clients are no longer asking for like these large strategy projects. I mean, here and there you'll get them, but most of the work is kind of some sort of technology build or managed service, whatever it may be. Every proposal or project, even like our traditional business and strategy consulting practices are working on, have some level of technology woven in. And so a lot of the trends we're going to talk about in the next 3 to 4 slides, I believe, will show you kind of how that's manifesting itself. So a couple of the things to talk through, right? Consumers now spend more than 5 hours a day on their smartphones. I encourage anyone, sometimes it's scary to do. I know it was for me when I did it. Pull up the settings tab on your iPhone and look at your screen time and see how you spend your time in a given day on your phone, number of times you pick it up, etc. All these types of things are increasing year over year. And so consumers are spending a ton of time on their phones. 50% are saying they use their smartphone to discover a new brand or product. Think about, all the Instagram ads you'll get, or even just, scrolling through people's Instagram stories or whatever it may be. Emails are another one. You're getting pushed products and services pretty much every minute. And there's a movie, I can't remember the documentary, but if you watch the documentary, you'll realize how these algorithms work. And you'll understand kind of where we're going with some of this work. I can't think of the name right now, the Netflix documentary, but
yeah, it's
moving forward,
evading my memory too, but
I know
it's a good but scary one.
Yeah. So a couple of things here is that those who are fully engaged represented 23% premium in profitability, revenue, and relationship growth. Essentially, what this is saying is that digital adoption and kind of the movement to digital platforms as relationship managers, think of like the Marriott app or your banking apps, whatever it may be, it tends to tie customers to the service provider in a more meaningful way where they become more profitable, they drive more revenue, ultimately they deepen the relationship. So it's not even just acquiring customers via these digital channels now, it's also retaining them. And that's why investments in trading platforms or investments in money movement applications like Venmo, for example, are so high because user experience and retaining customers in a market where it's so easy to move to the different competitor. I think of Uber and Lyft. Like, you have a negative experience with Uber, it's very easy to move to Lyft, and there's that scenario for every industry out there. So excellence and being like the top of the market in these digital spaces is incredibly important. Moving forward, so 70% of customers also say technology has made it easier, and this kind of alludes to what I just said, but makes it easier to take their business elsewhere. So, there's not really a massive brick and mortar tie that you have to a retailer or a service provider now. You can close one account, open another one within half an hour. I can delete my Uber app and move to Lyft, whatever it may be, which I would never do, by the way. I still think Uber is better, but like all of these things are very easy to switch between. You think of airlines, hospitality providers, like they all have mobile apps, they all have very similar processes. So it's a matter of making the process sticky. Moving forward, this is one of the ones I want to talk about, and I was trying to talk about 5 minutes ago, but just a 2% increase in customer retention has the same effect as decreasing cost by 10%. What that means is essentially, retaining that single customer continuously, and even if it's just 2% increase in that metric, will have the same effect because you're not having to go out and acquire customers you've lost. So you've already spent the money to acquire the customer, and you're just continuing to work off of that initial investment as that relationship deepens. So you don't have to continually go back and find out, okay, where can we cut costs this quarter or next quarter? You're continuing to build and deepen that relationship. This is especially relevant in the banking space, especially if you think about wealth management. The better experience you have with, say, a financial advisor, and it's first of all, your cost to switch, institutions, whatever, gets higher as you deepen the relationship, but also you invest more and more as you kind of get more comfortable, and year over year, that relationship becomes very deep. So a lot of this is all about creating experiences that are sticky, keep the customer happy. And I think what we'll talk about in a little bit is minimize the pain points that someone's running into. Okay. And then lastly, I think it's lastly here, is even a modest improvement in customer experience can help a billion-dollar company just increase revenue by 775 million over 3 years. I think a lot of this is just saying that, it doesn't take years and years of small investments to have kind of a return on investment here. Sometimes it's a single new app or a new product or even a new feature that can drive a lot of this revenue and customer retention.
Yeah, Jake, and I think just to kind of bring everything that you just talked to together, right? I think one of the key words coming out of this sort of market overview is experience, and that increasingly as companies and their products have become more digital, the experiences have become more digital, and the experience you have with a brand or with a product is the brand or the product extended. Right. So the experience is just as critical to the success of that product or that service as the product or service itself. It's no longer good enough to just have a good product. If the experience the customer goes through to get that product is not an enjoyable experience, there are plenty of other good products out there that are easy to switch to because everything's available at your fingertips.
And you think about especially what's happened over the last 18 months is like, the first interaction point and sometimes the only interaction point with customers now is a digital channel. And so, you may never set foot in a bank branch or in a retail store, stuff like that. So being able to, drive that end-to-end experience through mobile channels is incredibly important.
For sure.
Okay.
So then, Jake, the question becomes, what should we do?
Yeah.
How do
So
we think about problems now, understanding this context?
so going off of that, this is a framework that we use internally, and I'm not saying this is proprietary to EY, given especially the title of the slide, but in order to solve a lot of these problems, and we like to kind of go through something called design thinking. And I know this is becoming more and more commonplace at SOM, Binghamton as a whole. I know Dean Dillon, even when we started to graduate, was very, very high on it. But now that it's almost commonplace in the workspace and consulting, just wanted to walk through kind of what these different stages are. Essentially, it's the discovery process of how we go through and identify what the problem is, come up with various solutions through that kind of brainstorming phase, ultimately flip some prototypes around, see what works and what doesn't, and then lastly, test before we deploy. So the phases at a high level are empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. We're going to take you through all those, not only in preview this evening, but also something for the case as well. So just keep this slide or this methodology handy, because it'll be 5 steps that will be pretty easy to follow. But as we get through each of these, make sure you ask as many questions. I know a lot of this is probably new, but also there's plenty of resources online to kind of continue to dive deeper into what steps each of these entail. I think with that being said, I'm going to toss it over to Adam to kind of walk you through each of these at a high level.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. So I think one of the things we maybe alluded to up front in those introductions was the idea that the way this methodology may differ from traditional problem solving approaches you might take for a business case, or really any sort of problem solving in a space we're dealing with here, is you really put the user or the customer at the center of it all, as opposed to a goal or an objective, where traditionally you might say, how might we become more profitable, or how might we save on cost? How might we increase revenue? Instead, with design thinking, you really try, for starters, to empathize with the users of your product or your solution, to understand where the opportunities actually lie. So here, the first stage, you're going to conduct a lot of user research to just explore the customer's needs and get a better understanding of who the user actually is. And through that, you may come to understand that problems exist that you didn't even think you were trying to solve, or there's a desire for certain features or products or solutions that maybe don't exist anywhere in the world, let alone at your organization or through the offerings that your company is currently providing. And so really the objective of this stage is to start to identify some of the common pain points across those different end users. So you can start to get a sense of what's the aggregate or average story here, as opposed to individualized or biased needs or experiences. And then coming out of the empathize stage, you try to actually define those pain points and start to put some fences around them. So you're identifying common behavioral patterns across the users, and those start to help you create what we call personas or user personas, which instead of being feedback from Tom Jones and Jerry Smith and Carrie Jones, I don't know, I'm just like making up names, you start to develop personas of people who represent larger groups of similar users. Maybe it's based on age or other type of demographic. Maybe it's based on a certain type of attitude or personality that's common across your users, and you're grouping the wants and needs of those users under these umbrella personas. And after we actually go through this exercise, it gives us a better understanding of who we're designing for, what their experience has been, and where the opportunities exist. Those opportunities being opportunities to address those pain points, improve the experience. And like when we looked at those metrics, we know that in improving the experience, if we can increase retention with a product or a service, that can have real exponential effects on profitability or on revenue. So then after we really define the personas and the pain points, then we start to ideate around potential solutions. The most critical part about this stage in the process is we try to ignore all assumptions, all constraints up front, and brainstorm as many and as creative of solutions as we can to address some of the problems that we've identified. And really, we try to leverage multiple different brainstorming techniques. This would ideally involve people all across and around the source of the problems, not just technology people from let's say a consulting company or from one of our clients. But really, we want a cross-functional team that's aware of all different pieces of the puzzle, all different parts of the experience, and try to get down all of these thoughts on paper so that then we can start looking at them and evaluating them. So I think, what is this? This is where the rubber meets the road, right? That's a common phrase we'll use, where now we start thinking about the actual how, as opposed to just the who and the what. Then, after we're able to ideate around potential solutions and actually choose a solution to move forward with, we're never locked in on that solution. We can take an iterative approach where the first thing we'll try to do is prototype around that solution. So a prototype is really just a representation of an idea. If we're talking about digital products, it could be visual, like a wireframe, which would basically be a simple mock-up of what a screen or an application might look like, or some of the more common uses of the term prototype you might be more familiar with would be like a simple composite model representation of a physical item, or famous stories of people saying, yeah, I went into my garage, grabbed a couple pieces of wood, started duct taping them together, and then here's this prototype for, who knows what, a hockey goal or something like that. And what we try to do in the prototyping stage is really produce that representation of an idea to start giving us a better look and feel, so that new questions or concerns or challenges can be identified through that process too. Because once you start actually seeing the idea represented in front of you, some of those things make themselves more apparent than when you're just ideating around a theoretical solution. And then we can iterate throughout this stage, revisit the solution or the problem that we identified in the ideate stage, and perhaps bail after the prototype, start from the beginning again with prototyping a new solution, and just keep cycling through that till we feel like we're on the right track. And then we would proceed into more of our testing phase. In testing, that's really where we take those prototypes and we pair them with the potential users. And this is really where the iteration is designed to happen. So we're getting feedback on the solutions that we're developing these prototypes for, understanding what that feedback is and adapting to it in real time, and revisiting our assumptions to actually make sure we are building still the product that satisfies the user's needs. Because at the end of the day, we want to build a product that satisfies the user's needs, not build the product that we necessarily just set out to build. Our objective is satisfy the needs, not build a certain product or satisfy a certain scope of work. A common phrase I've heard used is, we're not trying to be right through this process, we're trying to get it right. Where a common pitfall in business problem solving is wanting to be right. By focusing on the user, we make sure we actually get it right. So with that, that's kind of the overview of the methodology. Like Jake mentioned, you can drill down in much more detail and become more educated on the different subjects, and start to actually look at some of the tools you can use to guide teams through different exercises within each of those phases. But Jake, I don't know if you wanted to maybe just give one or two quick shout outs to some of the products that as EY we've delivered, obviously leveraging this methodology within our teams to make sure we build the right solutions. But I think we'll just finish with that and then show our contact info and then pass it to MCG for the exercise.
Yeah, and this is some of what I alluded to earlier. I mean, essentially, as a firm, we've kind of touched so Adam and I are both in the financial services sector, but we've covered a handful of things, and you'll see in the bottom right, we did some really cool work with the Digital School of Medicine. Actually, a really interesting piece of work I was involved with was the cruise ship application. So, this idea of digital technologies and building apps is not like just banking driven, but I'm sure you'll hear a lot of examples of why that are kind of banking and wealth management driven. But yeah, we've kind of touched all the different bases here. I've worked on a handful of these. I know a couple colleagues that have worked on the rest of them. But yeah, any questions as we show our contact info on the next page, feel free to reach out. This is a phenomenal session. I think it's really, really solid gateway to this methodology and the competition as a whole. So I would encourage anyone to reach out, ask MCG questions, ask Adam and I questions. Yeah, and not even just like design thinking. If you have questions about UI, what we do, it's like in more detail, etc., like feel free to reach out. That being said, Anna, I think we're back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Adam and Jake, so much. I think that your presentation was really helpful, and I'm sure that the students all really appreciate it. And with that being said, I think I'm going to take over sharing my screen, and we're going to do a quick activity. So now that you've all kind of seen from EY what like the background of what design thinking is, we're going to go into a little bit more details of what we're expecting to see from you for the second round and then hoping to see this Friday. So as they mentioned, consumer personas are an important aspect of design thinking. And what we've drawn here is from TechX last year. So for those of you who didn't do it, which I'm sure is most of you, the case was McDonald's, and the case stated that the three main target markets were younger children and toddlers, teenagers, and then middle-aged parents. So as Adam and Jake said before, what you kind of do is be a little bit creative and pick a specific person who's kind of the typical persona who falls into that overall market. So we've created Lisa. She's 4, so she falls into the first target market for McDonald's, which is younger children and toddlers. Being a typical toddler, she's a picky eater, but she does love to eat French fries, which is kind of her motivation for going to McDonald's. She can have French fries, and also, as I'm sure most of you know, McDonald's has Happy Meals, which is meant for kids. So she gets to also have that fun experience, get a toy as well. However, again, being a typical toddler, she can be impatient and she throws temper tantrums when she gets hungry. So for those days where McDonald's may have slower service or there's a longer line at the drive-through, Lisa gets very frustrated with her experience. Our next market would be Gilbert. He's 17, so a teenager. And since he goes to high school, he doesn't have a job. So whenever he wants to go out to eat, he uses his parents' money. That's kind of his motivation for going to McDonald's, since it has a lot of food for a cheaper price, so he can eat it along with his budget that his parents give him. However, one of his pain points with McDonald's is that it is a bit lower quality food. So even though he can eat more burgers, he's still hungry as soon as he gets home. Our final market is going to be Sydney. She is 41, so she falls into the middle-aged parents range. And Cindy is a single mother of 2 children, and she works full-time as a nurse. So kind of what draws Sydney to McDonald's is that she wants her children to have dinner every single night. However, after working a full day, she might be too tired to cook. So she can go to McDonald's and get a quick meal for each of her kids without having to worry about cooking it. However, being a nurse and being a parent, she cares about the nutrition of her children. So she believes that there aren't enough healthy options at McDonald's. With all this being said, the case last year also stated that that McDonald's kind of wanted to shift their market into young professionals, which is people who fall in the range of their mid to late 20s and work for corporate America. So Josh and I have kind of created, his name is Joel. He's going to be the persona for this new market. However, before we get to the next slide, I'm curious if any of you have any ideas of what a young professional's motivation and pain points might look like. You can just type it in the chat. I'm not sure if I can see it when I'm sharing my screen. So Josh, if you want to go along with that.
Yep, we'll give you guys a few minutes, or a minute or two, I should say, just to put some stuff in the chat, and then we'll go through the slide. So we'll give you guys like 1 minute if you want to just put some ideas in there, and you'll kind of see what we thought in the next slide.
So what I'm seeing in the chat so far is a lot of people have ideas for what some motivations could be for Joel, our young professional, to go to McDonald's. I see the speed, yes, the fast service, that's what everyone's saying right now. Does anyone have any ideas for what might push a young professional away from McDonald's or other fast food restaurants?
If not, we're definitely going to go over it on the next slide, so no worries. Obviously, this is something new for everyone, so definitely want to get you guys thinking.
Oh, now I'm seeing some pain points. So the reputation and the limited vegetarian options. Also, I see that people think a pain point might be that there aren't as many healthy options at McDonald's. All of these are great ideas, by the way. Thank you guys so much for participating.
Yeah, so with that, we can move to the next slide where you kind of get to see what we thought. So as Anna said, this is our young professional. His name is Joel, age 28, career banker. So when you guys are making your persona, kind of go around the same way, give them a name, pick an age, obviously it's a young professional. So there's a range of ages that a young professional could fall in. But for Joel, we picked 28, career banker. Once again, that's kind of, we're thinking about someone who might be having, that 30-minute to an hour lunch break, they're working in a somewhat traditional job. So something that could be applied to most young professionals. As you can see, we also put a picture of Joel. So, something to just give it a little bit more personality. The judges can connect a little bit more. Remember maybe that face, maybe even if they forget the name, they'll remember, generally, okay, this is what that guy looked like. I remember them talking about it. And then background, just like on that other slide that Anna was talking about, give a bit of a background about your, persona group. So for Joel, he works 40 hours a week with a 30-minute lunch break, and he wants a quick meal that he can bring back to the office. So, we don't give too much background. The background is mostly focused around stuff that could, deal with the case. So, that 30-minute lunch break is pretty important. Obviously, for McDonald's, they want to know, they want him to go to McDonald's for lunch. So focusing in on that with the background stuff that could be applicable kind of to the case is important. So definitely, when you're giving your background, you don't have to give a full life story, just kind of give those important details. Motivations. So I think you guys actually did hit on a few of these, which is great, but we'll go through kind of what we had. Joel is an environmental activist, so he wants to support a company that promotes sustainability. Family has a history of heart disease, so he does not eat red meat. And finally, he wants a quick and easy order experience. As you see, some of these motivations are somewhat specific, like that heart disease one, but generally it's focused around, you don't want an unhealthy meal, but that's just kind of a more specific example. So if you're getting more specific, just make sure you're kind of talking about the underlying issue or motivation in this case. Just make sure it kind of connects back to maybe a bigger idea. For that one, unhealthy meals. For the environmental activists, sustainability is a big thing for a lot of young professionals, but we kind of focused it in on environmental. There's definitely other ways to also spin that. So make sure whatever way you're spinning your motivations for your personas, that it kind of fits with the overall idea for your group. And finally, for the pain points, the ones we identified were slow service, low quality / unhealthy food, animal cruelty, lack of social awareness, and difficult app navigation. So as you can see, a lot of these pain points do relate somewhat to the motivations. For example, the lack of social awareness really goes with the motivation of how he wants a company that promotes sustainability. And these pain points are kind of going to be the basis of your problems. You kind of want most of your problems that you're going to identify to go back to these pain points. It makes it a lot easier, and you can also make a nice cohesive story where for each of your problem and recommendation, you could talk about how that would make Joel happy. How would that affect his motivations? Would that help him with his pain points? Stuff like that. So definitely try to have a slide like as Anna showed before. You can kind of make a bunch of different personas like that. You can make a bigger persona like this. Just make sure you're kind of tying your recommendations and your problems into some sort of design thinking persona. Like Anna said too, it's not completely required for the first round, but definitely make sure that you're thinking like this because it will be required for the second round. So definitely make sure when you're coming up with your problems that you could do something like this. Definitely try to include it if you can. You guys don't have too much time as presentations are due on Thursday night, but definitely take this into account and try to do this if you can. But I'll pass it back to Anna to look at the next part.
Thanks, Josh. So with all that being said, we're kind of going to get into the next slide that we're hoping to see from you on Friday, but definitely expecting for the second round on October 22nd. So this right here is a journey map. We chose to do it for Joel since he was kind of our main persona for the McDonald's case. But I'm just going to kind of explain what exactly is on this slide, and then I'll let Josh talk about it more specifically regarding Joel. But so basically on the left, we have a little bit of a chart with each of his phases when it comes to his experience with McDonald's. So here we have 6. It doesn't have to be exactly 6 steps. It's just however many phases you think your persona has in their experience. So in this case with Apple. And the top row is positive experiences, the middle is neutral, and the bottom row is negative experiences. So then on the right, you can see that we've outlined Joel's 3 pain points, and each of these pain points, so each of the boxes matches with the red dots on the chart on the left. Basically, the pain points are obviously the issues that if you were actually presenting this to McDonald's, they would want as much detail as they can about where they're going wrong. So you need to explain it in as much detail as you can. And for the most part, these pain points should match your problem identification and then lead into your recommendations. But now, Josh, if you want to talk about it in more detail with Joel.
Yeah, so we'll go through somewhat quick, give you guys the general idea of kind of what this specific journey map was talking about. So as Anna said, this was about McDonald's. So phase one was finding a cheap food place nearby for lunch. So when it comes to McDonald's, Joel's pretty happy with that. McDonald's is a cheap place. There's so many locations all over the United States, so probably pretty easy for him to find one nearby. So that's a happy point for him. He's happy with that. That's an easy experience for him. Then phase two, choosing a health conscious location. So as Anna said, you can see, that's in the red. That's a pain point. So that corresponds with our first pain point over on the right. So when considering restaurants, McDonald's doesn't have a strong brand image when it comes to health initiative. When it came to, later in the presentation, when we talk about our problems, like Anna said, we kind of directly correlated them to his pain points and kind of used that to talk about how the young professional market would be impacted by our recommendations. So definitely an important slide here. Definitely make sure, give some thought to this journey map and what different phases you're putting on here. And definitely, like Anna said, it doesn't have to be specifically 6, whatever kind of fits the best with your journey and what you're trying to show. Definitely go with that. So then phase 3, choosing what menu items to order. So once again, a pain point that's in the red. So, with a crunch on time, McDonald's current menu layout and many options causes delays in figuring out what to order. So once again, something that makes it harder for him to get back in time. It takes time to figure out what he wants. A really specific, time crunch there with the menu. Then phase 4, you can see this is kind of in the yellow, driving to McDonald's locations. So this isn't specifically a pain point. This is more saying, driving to McDonald's location could be a difficult thing for him. Maybe the nearest McDonald's isn't that close, or maybe he doesn't have a car, so he's gonna have to walk wherever he wants. The reason that this isn't in the red is because, he's gonna run into these same problems with no matter what restaurant he goes to. Maybe the McDonald's is a little bit farther away than the Burger King, but still, either way, he's gonna have to find a way there. He might not be the happiest with having to drive at all to get food, and he might want to kind of move to a closer location. But definitely, it wasn't something that we thought was a major negative, but it also wasn't a positive for his experience. Phase 5 was his experience to pick up the food. So once again, in the red, this corresponds to that third pain point over on the right. So when arriving to McDonald's drive-through, long lines can make Joel frustrated since he needs to be back at work. So he only has that 30 minutes for work. So, time is really important for him. And if that drive-through is really packed and maybe he forgot to order ahead, he's not going to be able to get his food in time. So that's going to be a negative for him. And phase 6 is bringing the food back to work and eating it. Once again, pretty easy with McDonald's. They give you everything kind of pretty easy. It's all ready to eat. You don't have to really do much. All you have to do is eat when you get back. So that's an easy experience for him. As you guys can see, those 3 red dots kind of will correlate to direct problems that we'll identify and then go into recommendations. Obviously, we don't have those slides here, but when you guys are making your presentations, make sure you keep that in mind. It's very important to kind of have your ideas based off these personas. Make sure you're taking into account, what are the customers going to want, not just general ideas. So that's where this could differ from your traditional case, like that Management 111 case was very, you can just kind of identify the problems in the case and then go from there. From here, try to think about it from that consumer side and do your best with trying to make these journey maps in persona. But I'll pass it back to Anna to see. I think that was it with the exam.